Hello and welcome to our Facebook Live and YouTube friends, and of course our regular friends on Zoom and Instagram. Welcome one, welcome all. Tonight's discussion is probably something I get asked about. Well, it's up there, I'll tell you, in terms of questions and thoughts and ideas. We are going to be discussing, and I think it's a little bit apropos for what we are seeing in the world today in a number of ways, and that is, are there laws according to Judaism, which means according to the Torah, the written Torah and the oral Torah, the Gemara, that discusses the non-Jewish nations? I mean, here I am every day, every week, teaching and talking about mitzvot, Torah, for our people, the Jewish people. But let's be honest, there's a lot more non-Jewish people out there than there are Jewish people, way more. And so what is the Jewish view on those people who are not Jewish? Do they, according to Torah, have any obligations in any mitzvot at all? And that's going to be the fascinating discussion today. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, those people who've seen me before know that I'm active, maybe a little too active, on social media, and I'm active on YouTube with classes. I have, at this point, probably thousands of classes online in different places. I get asked way more questions from non-Jewish people than I do from Jewish people. I mean, it's a little bit unfair to make that statement because there's obviously a lot more non-Jewish people, but still, there's this idea they want to learn, understand, and the fact they are listening to a rabbi and asking questions of a rabbi. Along the way, they're going to say, well, am I obligated in mitzvot, Jewish law? Are they obligated to convert to Judaism? What's the view on that? We're going to delve deeply into this topic this evening, my dear friends. Just today, I got a Facebook message, this is true, from a woman who describes herself as a Palestinian from Sfat. I think by saying that, I shouldn't have identified her, who now lives in Europe. And she told me that she has a tradition in her family, that there's a Jewish line in there. Somewhere she's always felt this great connection and empathy with the Jewish people, although she is a self-described Palestinian, whatever that even means. I guess her family have been in Israel for a while. There are many nations who have been in Israel, including, of course, the Jewish nation in the land of Israel. And she wants to know if she can convert. I get such messages more than you'd ever know. I mean, at this point, 2 to 3 a week come through my various platforms. How do I answer these people? What's the first thing we do? Do I just send them a handbook of Jewish thought? Do I send them a copy of my books and say, read this and convert? How do we handle these things? So I've taken a lot of guidance over the years of how to deal with these people. The first thing we need to realize is that non-Jewish people do not need to become Jewish. They don't. They're fine as they are. Then why do they think that they do? Why are they contacting me, and I'm sure many of the rabbis, and saying, well, we're not happy with our religion, we believe in God, let's become Jewish? The answer, I believe, is because other religions, including the main ones, Christianity and Islam, which makes up probably a big bulk of the world, all these individuals, these religions, I should say, believe that unless you become a member of their faith, that's a Jesus believer, or a Muhammad is my prophet believer, you're going to hell. I mean, that's just the way it is. You may not like me saying that, but that is the theological truth. It's a given, it's a postulate. If you don't accept Jesus as your savior, you don't accept Muhammad as your prophet, you're doing wrong. Let me say something very clear to everyone who is watching today. This is not true of Judaism. According to Judaism, you don't need to become Jewish, meaning you don't need to be born Jewish to have a connection with the one and true God of the entire world. We the Jewish people, no nation in the world has a monopoly with God. We just don't. Every nation in the entire world has a connection with the one true living God of Israel. We do have a monopoly on Torah. That we do have. That we have a connection to. We, the Jewish people, were given the Torah in the Jewish year 2448, 1313 BCE. That is 3,333 years ago, and about a couple of weeks. We stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah. But did you know, and this is something that most people are not aware of, and I want to make this very clear, that there were laws that existed for all the world, even the Hebrews, who eventually became the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, before the Torah was given. And if you think about it logically, there must have been laws, my friends, that were given before the Torah was given 2,500 years after Adam HaRishon was expelled from the Garden of Eden. There must have been laws, because we see in the Torah itself many stories about nations that did wrong and were punished. We know, for example, that, Adam sinned. That we have for sure. But the people in the time of Noah, we know that they sinned. And that's why the flood, the Mabul, came upon them. Well, what did they do wrong? So we're told what they did wrong. They were involved in stealing and sexual immorality. Well, who said it was forbidden to steal or it was forbidden to be sexually immoral? It can't have been written in the Torah because the Torah had not been given yet. So something's off over here. And even the days of Sodom and Amorah, what exactly did they do wrong? And they were involved in sexual immorality as well. That was also before the Torah was given. Then where was it written? Where were these people notified? We assume, you have to assume, if God is a fair God, he would have told them beforehand and said, hey, by the way, before you get going, these are the laws you need to abide by. They must have existed. If they didn't exist, then what exactly did they do wrong? And the people at the time of the Dor HaFlaga, the door of the separation, also known as the Tower of Babel generation, they must have done something wrong as well. Otherwise, on what basis were they being punished? So the entire Torah and all the Torah stories up to the giving of the Torah is about people who are doing good things and people who are doing bad things. But what was the standard? And who created these laws? Where did these laws come from? So that we're going to see is the truth. There were laws. Actually, there were 6 laws that were given to Adam HaRishon, to Adam. 6 laws that were given to Adam. And the 7th law was then given to Noah after he came out of the ark after the flood. That makes a total of 7. They are called, in totality, the 7 laws of Noah. Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, given to the children of Noah. Who are the children of Noah? Everyone. Because all of humanity descends from Noah, Jews included. And the Jewish people were, according to most opinion, included in these 7 laws as well, until the giving of the Torah, when these 7 laws were repeated to all the non-Jewish nations, and the Jewish nation was separated out, we became the Am HaNivchar, the chosen people, who now had to abide by 630 mitzvot. I know it sounds like a really big increase from 7 to 613. It sounds like Bitcoin about 2 years ago, not recently. That's probably declined. However, that is the big increase the Jewish people had. The 7 mitzvot were left behind for us. According to some, we're still obligated. According to many people, we're not obligated. but we now became obligated in 613. And so, now we have a situation. We have to know, I guess the world has to know, what these 7 mitzvot are of Noach are. And why they're called the 7 mitzvot of Noach and not the 7 mitzvot of Adam. But we've already proved they must have existed before the time of Noach even, because Noah was actually around in a generation who were doing terrible things, and those people were punished. So we have a tradition in Judaism which still applies today, which is 7 laws that apply to all nations of the world. I mentioned this woman before who contacted me, this Palestinian from Tzfat. Seems like a nice lady, and she does definitely feel Jewish. But when a rabbi is approached by a non-Jewish person, by any non-Jewish person who says, and believe me, every rabbi today, if they're out in the field like I am especially, I'm not just dealing with a small Jewish community, I'm out there, I put myself out there deliberately to reach Jewish people. You're going to get a lot of non-Jewish people reaching out to you like I do regularly. And they're going to ask you, do I need to become Jewish? And the answer is no. No, you're absolutely fine just the way you are. Just a few caveats. You may have to leave your religion. That we'll discuss in a moment, depending on the religion. And you do have to accept upon yourself the 7 mitzvot of Noach. I'm going to list these are now. These 7 I'm going to describe to you are found in the Gemara, but they were widely known for a long time by many nations. And actually, there are groups and societies and communities of people, thousands and thousands of them all over the United States and the world. And I hear from them, and I've met many of them and had communication with them who have created societies and even temples, if you will, that celebrate God, that pray to God, and who keep these 7 laws deliberately. Okay, let's wait no longer. Let's go through these 7. And these 7 are really headlines. There's actually many more. Some people say 30. Some people say 44 laws come out of it. But I'm not an expert in every detail. There are people who know this a lot better than me. If you're interested, you can definitely contact me. I'll direct you to the right resource to discover more. Okay, the first law that applies to non-Jewish people, to all people, including Jews actually, this is one of the 3 cardinal sins even of Judaism, is no idol worship. That means non-Jewish nations are judged if they are worshipping idols or not. Now, I know you thought that only Jews could not be involved in idol worship because it appears as number 2 in the 10 Commandments. And it's true. And it's one of the worst sins for a non-Jewish person. One that they may even in certain circumstances have to give their life up rather than doing. But non-Jewish people can also not worship idols. And idol worship, there's a dispute today whether idol worship even exists at all in today's society. I'll focus for a moment on Christianity, because there's a machloket, a dispute among the Jewish commentators, whether Christianity actually is considered to be an idol-worshipping religion. Now, you ask most Christians, and they would say, no, what are you talking about? So the weird thing is, according to Judaism, it may well be not a idol-worshipping religion, but for those nations, maybe it is. That's Christianity. And that's because there are branches within Christianity, although we don't really make a dispute between Catholicism and Protestantism, actually. We kind of lump it all together. However, we say there are opinions that say, yeah, Christianity, since they see Jesus as God, right, as part of the trifecta, if you will, the trihead of God. He became God incarnate according to them, which he didn't, but according to us, that could well be a problem. That's why it's it is forbidden for a Jew to even walk into a church. Now again, according to Judaism, it may not be full-blown Christianity, because if it was, it would lead to a lot more problems in terms of our dealings with the Christians. However, I guess the way I used to describe it is it smacks of Christianity. Now, I know that Christians may be offended by that and will say they're not. But remember, I'm giving you the definition according to Judaism. In the best case scenario, it's a shutfut. They see it as a partnership between man and God. We dismiss that totally. And this was known and given. And this is the reason that Abraham spent his entire life, as well as Sarah's wife, telling people not to worship idols. Actually, we know that Abraham's father, Terach, was an idol worshipper. Actually, more than that. He had a business selling idols. And we know that Abraham himself spent many years of his life worshipping idols until he saw the truth. Now, how he got to the truth is only through his own understanding. But there was an understanding that existed from the days of Adam until Abraham. It's like 20 generations. That was, you don't worship idols. We are totally forbidden from being involved in any form of idol worship. Actually, any nation is. By the way, we know in the past that all nations were judged. You see stories. How about today? Are non-Jewish nations held accountable for how they treat us, the Jewish people, how they treat each other, stealing, killing, anti-Semitism? Are they judged for that by God? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. We know at least once a year. We know the entire world, Kol Boya Olam, the entire world are judged on Rosh Hashanah. That's not just the Jewish people. And we know that on Sukkot, following Yom Kippur, there are sacrifices that were brought on behalf of non-Jewish nations in the temple in Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And so if you were to say, well, maybe there's laws that we're going through, we saw one of them 6 to go, that apply to non-Jewish nations. Well, when are these non-Jewish nations judged by God? And the answer is at least once a year, but it could be every single day. I mean, God is constantly watching us, the Jewish people, to see if we are fulfilling our obligation in this world. And God at the same time is judging every non-Jewish person because they also have a role in this world. They also have a great function. God, all humans are created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And God listens to the prayers of all people throughout the entire world. Once again, I'm going to say it again. We, the Jewish people, do not have a monopoly on God. We have a monopoly on Torah and mitzvot, but not on God. And every human is expected to build, as individuals and communities, their own strong connection with the true God of Israel. And even King Solomon, when he built the temple, he prayed and he said, he asked God to listen to all the prayers that were said there of the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people. And non-Jewish people brought offerings to the temple. And it was called the house, the bayit, the kolamim for all the nations, is how the temple in Jerusalem is described as. That doesn't mean they need to become Jewish in order to serve God. You're fine just as you are. And that is the first answer every rabbi is going to give. A non-Jew says, I want to convert to Judaism. The simple answer is, why? You're fine just as you are. If you follow these laws, believe in the one true God of Israel, and live a moral and ethical life, you're good to go. You don't need to become Jewish. And then they push, and they push, and they learn, and they want to, and then it becomes a different discussion. That's not for now. But initially, they're fine just as they are. So that's number one, no idol worship. Number two, no murder, which of course is one of the 7 mitzvot of Noach. Okay, and of course applies to us, the Jewish people. It actually reappeared in the 10 commandments again. Why it had to reappear is that the Jewish people knew that murder applied to them as well, of course, but also there's more to murder than just killing people. There are higher levels that are expected of the Jewish people when it comes to murder. If you embarrass somebody, in some way you're killing them. Okay, it's not a capital crime, or we'd all be in big, big trouble, but we're held to a higher standard. But no murder. And by the way, murder does include abortion. According to the Jewish people, non-Jewish people, just like ourselves, should not commit abortion. Now, there are exceptions. There are exceptions, right? When abortion is permitted, if the child is a rodef, that means the mother's life is in danger, physical or extremely mental danger from having a baby, there are circumstances where abortion is permitted. So there is no blanket. There's always exceptions to the rule, but the rule still stands that all people in the entire world, according to Judaism, are not allowed to commit abortion. Suicide is forbidden. Suicide is not allowed, definitely for Judaism, of course, but no person in the entire world is permitted to kill suicide. Life is a gift, and every single human on earth has to respect the power of life. Mercy killing, pulling the plug on all this kind of stuff when a person's going to go, these things are forbidden. Life is a life. Jew, non-Jew makes no difference. It is a gift from God, and therefore it is totally forbidden. That's number 2. Number 3 is no blaspheming God. No person is allowed to blaspheme and take God's name and blaspheme against God. Okay? Whatever that means, it means. And so a true respectful relationship needs to exist between every person in the entire world and God himself. Therefore, according to Judaism, this is pretty obvious, no human, maybe it's not, no human is allowed to be an atheist, right? Everyone is obligated to believe and build a personal relationship with the one true living God of Israel, right? We know that Isaiah chapter 45 verse 18 says, God created the world that it might be settled. God wants to have a world that is no idol worship and no murder and no blaspheming God. He wants all of humanity to feel settled and be at peace. This will happen, by the way, in totality when the Messiah comes. When Mashiach comes, it's not that just the Messiah for the Jewish people. This is for all the entire world. And the prophets go out of their way to say that all the nations, of which there are 70 initial and root nations that exist in the world, are going to make their way to the land of Israel and to Jerusalem, to the house of God, to the Beis Elokim, to inquire of God and to build a connection with him. Once again, everyone needs to have a connection to God. Next is one that you probably would have expected in the list of 7 laws, is you're not allowed to eat the limb of a live animal. That's a category within which is non-Jewish people cannot torture animals or mistreat them or drink their blood. Okay? They need to be, now they don't need to be killed via shrita, the way we kill them, but they are required to treat all human life and animal life with respect. Okay? And once again, let's say they don't. They're judged. God gives blessing and curse to all people and all nations. And God judges nations. At least we said on Rosh Hashanah. Next, number 5, this one should make sense as well, is no stealing. No stealing. And stealing means a number of things over here. First of all, it means that we have to keep society going. And if people steal stuff, which we said, remember the people of the time of Noah's flood, there was no Torah, but these laws were known. Oh, by the way, as a side point, the 7th law, which was added at the time of Noah, was the one of not eating the limb of a live animal. That was the one that was added on. Why was that not given to Adam? Because until Noah exited from the ark, everybody was vegetarian. There was no meat eating. After the flood of Noah, there was some kind of change in the Bria, in creation, and we were permitted to eat animals. At that point, the law of not to eat the limb of a live animal kicked in. That's when it was given. And so all the 7 laws are named after Noah because every human comes from Noah and sees them as their ancestor. So that was the 7th law that was given much, much later. Number 5 says no stealing. At the time of the flood, before the flood came, people were stealing. What were they stealing? People's things and people's spouses. Okay, that's also a form of stealing. And if there's one thing that gets God angry, whatever that means, and I'm quoting a verse from the Bible in Genesis chapter 20, when it says, Lo tinaf, do not commit adultery. The word tinaf is actually 2 words, ten af, give anger. Because there's one thing we see that God does not tolerate well and makes God angry. I mean, I barely understand God. But one thing I know is we don't want God to be angry with us. We want God to be behind us and love us. And that is, don't commit adultery. That makes God angry. Breaking down the family unit. Societies that break down from sexual immorality, and in this case, stealing, doesn't just mean people's things, also people's spouses. They say that a woman's about to get married or had a monogamous relationship at the time of Noah, and someone just come along and grab her off for himself. Unacceptable. And God, we see from many, many stories in the entire Bible, gets very angry with that. So sexual immorality and adultery, we're going to see in a moment, is one of the 7 mitzvot, but it even falls under this one of no stealing. Stealing people's things and stealing people's spouses. These are forbidden. I want to add one more, because there's something else you can steal, which most of us don't even consider to be stealing, but it is. And that is stealing people. Why would you steal people? Well, you'd kidnap them. That's also stealing. Stealing the most precious thing that people have, themselves. Who steals people? People who want to use other people for their own benefit. We generally call that slavery. Slavery is absolutely forbidden the way it's being practiced by non-Jewish nations. If a person wants to give themselves up to work as a servant for somebody else, the Torah says that's permitted, but that person is not there against their will and must be treated respectfully. If not, God gets angry. Taking a person against their will in chains and making them work for you is stealing people, i.e. kidnapping, also known as slavery, totally forbidden in the Torah for any person in any nation. Next, we have no sexual immorality. No sexual immorality applies to all people in all nations. It is totally forbidden. And once again, God gets very angry when it comes to sexual immorality. We said this is one of the few things where God himself gets angry, and plagues, whatever that means, plagues come upon the world when sexual immorality is present. Okay? God judges nations. Every nation is judged and is expected to live a higher moral code. One more law, and then we'll finish. And that is every society, there's difference of opinions, but most people say that this is that every society is obligated to set up fair and moral court and legal systems. That's what they need to do. Fair, moral, ethical, legal systems in their countries. Now, of course, there's always people who take advantage. There's always people who will act immorally within the legal system, judges, lawyers, or whatever. I understand. That's not what we're talking about. They'll be judged individually. We're saying that do societies, like the United States, has a moral and ethical code. It happens to be an excellent moral code. In many ways, it's based upon the Torah and the Judeo/Christian, although I don't like to slash one or the other, the Judea, the Bible, okay? No doubt about it. The early British and Americans who were here from the early days of the creation of the state were very knowledgeable of Torah and really fashioned a very ethical and moral system. It just is. The moral code of America. Again, you can say to me, but we see they do terrible things here and there and things that I understand. It's a work in progress. But as an experiment goes, it's excellent. And so, law courts. I'll tell you a quick story. I believe the story is about King Solomon. I may be wrong. But there is a Gemara, or maybe it's a Midrash, that I remember reading myself, that King Solomon went to visit a court of law in another nation. And he walked in, and he saw that the judge or the king, whoever it was deciding, was sitting there, and 2 plaintiffs walked in. And one was complaining that the other one had stolen his land. And this one said, I didn't steal your land. He said, you did steal my land. And King Solomon saw the judge look at them and say, you know what? You're both dead. He had them both killed and took the land for himself, for his nation state. And he looked at King Solomon and said, so what do you think? And King Solomon, by the way, if you think it's a strange story, that's happening in many parts of the world to this very day. King Solomon asked him the following question. This is fascinating, by the way. He said, tell me, does it rain in your country? And the guy's like, what? He goes, does it rain? And the judge says, yeah, it does rain. He says, do you have animals in your country? And the judge told King Solomon, I do have animals in my country. And these animals eat the produce that grows because of the rain? And the judge/king said, yeah, they do. If not, they die. And he said, let me be very clear with you. If you have a legal system like this, that you abuse your people, the only reason rain is coming down and blessing is coming into your country and your nation is because of your animals. They have a higher moral code than you do. So you better shape up, because if God judges you for what you're doing to your people from this immoral code, these unethical law court systems you've created that are open to bribery and blackmail and everything else, you're going to be wiped out. And according to Judaism, the nations of the world that have come and gone, and there have been many, that have disappeared over time, at some point, we can assume were judged harshly by God for their inappropriate behavior when it comes to these 7 laws. We're going to run through them again. And then there's a very important caveat. No idol worship. Forbidden for every single person in the world. Christianity, according to Judaism, does smack of it. And if a person approaches me and says, should I leave my church? The answer is yes. Islam, interestingly enough, does not fall under an idol worshipping religion. They believe in the one true God of Israel. They believe in Muhammad, but they don't believe Muhammad was more than a prophet. They don't see him as a god. Happens to be that we have more in common. That's why, according to Judaism, this may sound strange, you are permitted to pray in a mosque. And happens to be that I have done it many times. In Hebron, in Mar Machpelah, right, where our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their respective wives, without Rachel, are buried. We actually share that a few times a year. That space is given to Muslims, and they get to use it as their personal prayer space. That is understandable and acceptable because they're not idol worshipping, and therefore that is not considered a misuse of that space. So no idol worship. I actually have a good friend of mine who is the security guard at the university where I teach at Yeshiva University. We became very good friends. A number of years ago, we would get big debates. Eventually, he is very knowledgeable, a wonderful man. I actually made a short video about him and put it online a number of years ago that got quite a few hits. And he, after his research and learning, he realized that his church was selling him falsehood sheker, and he left his church. And he left. And he became a Ben Noach. He follows these 7 laws deliberately. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in just one moment, or I've overrun my time. No murder, including abortion, suicide, mercy killing. No blaspheming God. No eating the limb of a live animal or animal mistreatment. No stealing, we said, including kidnapping and slavery. No sexual immorality. And setting up fair, moral, ethical law court systems. There is one last piece, so I hope you've remained with me to the end. And that is, or I'm glad you have, and that is the Rambam tells us that these 7 laws, you can't just happen to be teaching and following, rather, by coincidence. You need to say, I follow these 7, and I believe in these 7 because it's commanded by the God of Israel to all nations. If a person does that, they are considered, says Maimonides, Hasidic Olam, the great righteous individuals of the nations, and they actually get to go to Olam Haba, to the next world. Every person who exists, who was created by God, has the potential to go to Olam Haba, to the next world. We, the Jewish people, don't even have a monopoly on Olam or Haba, on the next world. I mean, the question I get asked as well, I'm sorry if I've overrun my time a little bit, is If this is true, that Judaism believes this, why don't we promote it and publicize these laws? Well, there have been times in history when we did actually promote these laws more actively. In recent times, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, of blessed memory, he made a big deal of spreading these 7 laws and used his shluchim, his messengers, to go out and teach this to all nations. I think one of the reasons is that we've been too busy post-Holocaust just building our own people and getting them to follow the laws and, marry Jewish. That's become a burden and a struggle and taken enough of our attention without dealing with the rest of the world. Okay? We don't actively promote this, and of course we don't even actively promote people to become Jewish because they don't need to. However, it doesn't take away from the basic truth that every person has to believe in the God of Israel, that these laws come from God and they're obligated, and this is how they connect to God. As it says in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 16, and the Lord God commanded upon man, not just upon Jew, every man is expected, and woman, of course, to follow the laws of the Bnei Noach. And if you look online, you can look it up if you haven't already, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people around the world today, and especially in America today, who follow these laws deliberately. They are considered Chasidei Olam. They are taught, they have prayer sessions, they learn together. It's very inspiring, and God willing, will all nations, as the prophet Isaiah tells us, will be able to go up to the house of Jacob, to the temple in Jerusalem. That will be a temple not just for the Jewish people, for the entire world, and we'll be able to bring sacrifices as well as they will be able to bring sacrifices as well. Okay, we got through it. Thank you very much for joining me. If you do have questions, which I'm sure many of you do, feel free to email me, and I'll see you all tomorrow at 12.